actually landing in Yarmouth. The weather forecast was phenomenal from Channel 7, and I had just seen it actually right before lunch, and I ordered a full department recall to get our guys back to the station, so because I knew we were going to get hit, and we did. We were, very overwhelmed, but we handled it. And normally I could call on my neighbors for help, but in the mutual aid system, but they were also affected by the tornado as well. So we had to handle pretty much everything on our own. There was no outside help till much later in the storm. But we did well. It was I was actually at our station 1 where I am today in my office, helping the dispatcher because we were so overwhelmed. I ran the second console, and I can remember looking at Lieutenant Caton, who's now retired, and saying, because the guys would call him the Jinx, actually, whenever he worked an extra shift. And I said, really, this is how you're going to retire? We're going to go out with a tornado? And it was a little comical, but it lightened up the seriousness of the hazard that we faced there. But we got it done, and the members of the department did a phenomenal job, as did the PD. And but it really highlighted the vulnerability we have being in a non-hardened facility here in South Yarmouth. And I'm very excited about the future, and hopefully we can move to the other station someday and be in a protected building, which is Station 3, which is where this proposal is for the extra canopy and the battery pack is going to end up. So
yeah, and if you could just highlight that, Chief, for a second, for those that might watch this on the web later on. Right now, headquarters is Station 1 in South Yarmouth, which is in a floodplain and is a 1950s vintage wooden building, I believe, yeah, versus what we're proposing over on Station 3, which is in West Yarmouth. Can you describe that a little bit?
Sure. So currently the South Yarmouth Fire Station has been added on to and renovated several times over the years. It's a partial block/wood frame building. And as you said, Rich, it's in the floodplain. Our current dispatch center is located here in South Yarmouth, and Station 3 was a masonry Hurricane 3-proof structure that was built in 2007. It has 4,000 available square feet on the second floor there for the future, and we hope to move up there, hopefully in the near future, as funds allow, obviously, and get our dispatch center up there, and hopefully build a new emergency operations center up there in a protected building, which is where we need to be.
And I might ask Jeff Colby from a DPW perspective, Jeff, if you could just comment on your response to the tornadoes from July in 2019.
Yeah, thank you, Rich. That was a very memorable day. In fact, the cleanup continued for months afterwards, and that's probably the biggest lift for the DPW was just the getting roads open, which took, in some cases, weeks, depending on trees and wires down and other activities. It was particularly challenging. Interestingly enough, when you look at the hazard index, tornadoes is on the list, but it's only as possible. Certainly,
right. I thought that was pretty funny, actually.
It is highly likely or even likely. So I find that kind of interesting as we cover the slides here. But, certainly, our challenges and our vulnerabilities were exposed by that tornado. And the fact that when something of that magnitude hits, we physically don't have enough resources. So we quickly saw resources from other communities, including on Cape Cod within the following weeks and days after the event, to the National Guard. I hadn't had the opportunity to work directly with the National Guard before, based upon an emergency or disaster. And so this was a good opportunity to work with other agencies. MEMA was very supportive. In fact, sending down a liaison to work with us during cleanup. We also had, support services from Red Cross and others, and that was very impressive to see the support in the days and weeks that followed that came from all different places, state as well as local partners.
And Jeff, as we move forward, talking about what we're, did with this MVP planning grant that we got and what our future looks like, just set the stage a little bit. Your operations for all those efforts you talked about happened at the DPW facility, and what's happening with that facility now. And if you could also just mention the importance of the 50 Workshop Road area, which is also part of our planning efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the fire chief was talking a little bit about the fire station at Buck Island Road, and we're in the process of building a new DPW facility directly across the street from that Buck Island Road fire station. So I'm very excited about that municipal complex of buildings that'll be there across the street, and the way that they can mutually support each other and work together. That's very exciting, and looking at some of these different things that I'm sure we'll talk about in more depth going forward. But just having a more central facility for the DPW at that one location versus the 5 decentralized or spread out locations that we are throughout town right now will certainly help assist in response and cleanup and organizing assets and resources. So that's certainly a great opportunity. And then you also mentioned the 50 Workshop Road. There's a lot of exciting things going on there. That has recently been a commercial transfer station as well as a septage facility, but we're looking into a number of other elements that we're calling the Cape Cod Energy Park, which would be an anaerobic digester, some solar battery technology as part of this effort that's being investigated, and just a number of different opportunities at a very convenient location right off of Exit 8 that is that 50 Workshop Road property.
And that site is acts as a kind of regional staging area for most of the rest of Cape Cod, as well as the regional septage plant. And so it's more than just importance to the town of Yarmouth.
Absolutely. Both those facilities, septage and the transfer station there, are regional in nature.
And that's where most of your, isn't that where NSTAR staged a lot of vehicles, and a lot of the tree removal companies staged vehicles, as well as the debris ended up at Workshop Road, correct?
Well, they have in the past. The debris management was just to the south of the Workshop Road site at the disposal area at the sanitation, just south of the train track. So yeah, the same kind of general area, but that was very important to us as well as far as debris removal and staging.
So Dan, as part of our, before we get into the nitty gritty here, just to kind of encapsulate everything that Jeff and Phil just told us, you've kind of been on this resiliency and preparedness bent for quite a while in your planning efforts for the town. And so how does all this kind of pull it together with what Phil and Jeff have been talking about?
Well, I think from my perspective, Rich, that was the planning that went into the Cape Cod Energy Park concept years ago, got all of us thinking as to what the future of that site could be. So, with that initial group of individuals, yourself, including Jeff Colby and Ed Centeo, I think the concept for where this grant application came from was kind of galvanized, not only in the tornado event, but we had 3 significant nor'easters in March of 2018 that demonstrated how fragile, I would call it, the electrical grid is here on Cape Cod. And it's always been apparent to me from everything that I've learned in emergency management that a community does best if it can plan for up to 3 days of self-sufficiency as it relates to energy, water, and things of this. And so if you look at the regional septic facility as a utility, as a vital utility to the Cape Cod region, and how it presently runs versus what this grant opportunity allows us to turn it into, I think it just made perfect sense when John and his team approached us on this grant opportunity to bring the resiliency activities and the advancement in battery technology to the site. That, coupled with what the Phil Simone was talking about, is in the event of a flooding disaster, high wind event, Station 3 is a hurricane proof type building, and it just would make sense that our operations would gravitate towards there. And just out of the luck of delays in planning for a new DPW building, it worked out such that with the new building, we'll be able to incorporate that building into the campus. And I think we'd be very unique if you look at a public works facility, brand new, a hurricane rated fire substation that's got some pretty good magnitude to it, coupled with a regional utility facility that would all be linked on this, if you will, this microgrid for its ability to operate itself for up to 10 days, cut off from the rest of the electric grid. So it really is an interesting and intriguing opportunity. And I wanted to thank John, who helped to drive, if you will, the technical conversation related to this, because what we're attempting to do is by no means an easy task, and there's been a lot of hands that have helped along the way. So I'm glad to be at this point where we can talk about the next stage of the project.
So just one quick comment, Rich. Thank you so much, Dan. Also, definitely recognizing the important work of Weston and Sampson Engineering, led by Joe McGinn on this call, our project partner in the town of Yarmouth, who's been fantastic on this project as well.
And John, if I might impose upon you, so Kathy and the Community Development Department did a great job, very prescient with their list of hazards that came to fruition shortly after the completion of the report. But if I could pose upon you, build upon her and her team's work in identifying those hazards and how you considered those in approaching this grant, last grant application that we submitted, and if you could describe that a little bit and kind of go back to these objectives of that we're trying to achieve here.
Sure, Rich. And do you mean that the current grant application that we're putting in right now?
No, and the planning grant where we got the tying all this together with the 75.
Got it. Well, I thought that the initial MVP planning report that Yarmouth did was quite good, and it was very, very clearly written. You could tell that Kathy and her team had put a lot of thought into distilling the comments that were received from community stakeholders in Yarmouth, also regional stakeholders and departmental leadership. So hats off to Kathy. What really jumped out at us as is Dan and Steve Roy from Weston Sampson and Joe McGinn, and I really took a look at that, was that, as you outlined really clearly on this slide, actually, Rich, it all comes down to continuity of operations and the ability for the critical facilities to communicate amongst city departments, but also out to the population of citizens of Yarmouth and regional. And then the infrastructure that's critical, as Jeff Colby mentioned a couple moments ago, the transfer station and regional septic plant are regional by nature. They're critical facilities from a health and safety perspective because you can't have solid waste and septic waste backing up. But to really identify what are the most critical regional facilities, what are the most critical communication services, and as Chief Simonian said, what are the most critical emergency services that are provided in terms of dispatch, fire, EMT, emergency response, and to focus in on those top priorities. And that's how we, working with Dan and Rich on this call, that's how we submitted the grant to the state. And I think the state viewed it as a very compelling grant opportunity. And they came back, the state said, we definitely want to prioritize the regional septic and transfer station property, as well as your emergency response facilities. So I think that it resonated with the state as well.
And in reality, Dan's concept was more town-wide, and it incorporated several municipal facilities. And we actually had requested some funding for multiple facilities, but you can't give Yarmouth everything at once, all at once, I guess. So we did have to make some choices, and the state asked us to narrow that down, and that's how we ended up with the transfer station site, or the workshop road site, I should say, and the fire station 3 as our pilot programs here. And John, in talking to you, we were really interested in building off of the solar concept of what that's going to do for us. And as we fleshed that out, we ended up with the microgrid concept of self-sufficient operations for up to 10 days with using battery backup storage. And not part of our grant or application, but part of our future consideration is maintaining communications using our fiber network, supported by the ongoing independent power that's generated from these facilities. And so
Absolutely.
that's part of the objectives that we're trying to achieve here. It also met the objectives of the state's requirements for addressing climate change realities. And important to the town is cost savings or revenue generation. If we can achieve that at the same time as getting all these other benefits, is very attractive from a town's perspective. And as a matter of fact, we did receive some projections, which we'll get to in a second, as to the financial feasibility of what's being proposed. So we'll go over that. Part of that, and I'd call on Austin Brandt from the Cape Light Compact, who is one of our key partners in this grant effort. Austin, could you talk about CLC's demand response program a little bit and how that fits into what we're contemplating here?
Absolutely, thanks, Rich. So just a quick intro to Cape Light Compact. We're your neighbors in South Yarmouth off White's Path, and we implement the regional energy efficiency programs, which are better known statewide as the Mass Save program. So we are that energy efficiency program administrator for Cape Cod and Martha's Vineyard. And traditionally, we have been very focused on saving customers energy, measured in terms of kilowatt hours and megawatt hours at scale. But in recent years, the energy efficiency programs have had increasing focus on reducing actually the peak demand of our regional system. And the reason behind that is that peak demand is really the primary driver of the infrastructure costs built into our electricity delivery system. That includes, of course, power plants that are feeding into the grid, and of course, the transmission and distribution poles and wire systems that are delivering the electricity across our region. So they have to be built out to meet that system-wide peak demand. And over time, if you can reduce that demand, you can actually control those infrastructure costs, which are actually paid for essentially by all ratepayers through either the distribution, transmission, or supply side of their bills, depending on the infrastructure we're talking about. So in recent years, the program administrators, including Cape Light Compact, have developed demand response programs that reward customers for helping reduce that peak demand and cost effectively provide demand savings for all ratepayers in the region. And we've called that program Connected Solutions. This summer will be the first summer that Cape Light Compact has been able to offer it to our customers. And the idea behind it is that we will pay an incentive to customers to reduce energy at peak times of the year during not only the summer, but also some select events over the winter. And when we talk about reducing peak demand, storage is obviously has a very important role to play to that. In that, and is a very important asset in that program structure. And so in the context of what we're talking about for the town, this is an opportunity for the town, which is installing these storage units to provide resiliency and reliability for core operations, to better utilize those assets or improve their utilization throughout the year when they're not needed for that resiliency and reliability, which of course will always be their number one operational objective. And so for times of the year where it is less likely that there are going to be reliability events, the town can have those assets participate in our Connected Solutions program, where when we ask those storage units to dispatch, they can actually send energy back to the grid, therefore reducing that peak regional demand. And we will actually essentially pay the town for providing that service. So really this is a win-win, not only for the town, but also for ratepayers, because the town is getting better utilization of its assets and getting an additional revenue stream while cost effectively reducing that system-wide peak demand and saving ratepayers money in the long run. So happy to answer questions afterwards if there are any, but that's the basic idea of how this grant program fits in with a relatively new program that the Cape Light Compact is offering for a win for the town and a win for CLC and ratepayers.
That's great. John, we had talked at one point, if maybe you could just explain the technical details of how our microgrid solar PV systems work as far as how they're related to the grid and the infrastructure that has to go into supporting that.
Yeah, absolutely, Rich. And Cape Light Compact has been a fantastic partner on this project. So thank you to Austin and to Maggie Downey, the executive director. The idea from an architecture perspective for resiliency is that we want to combine multiple types of assets so that we have more redundancy, so that you're not just relying on one asset like a backup generator that could run out of diesel fuel, as happened in Hurricane Sandy down in New Jersey and New York, or generators that have unfortunately failed quite often in hospitals. Instead, we want to combine solar as a clean energy resource, battery storage, which is lithium-ion batteries, fast responding, powerful batteries, the existing investments that the town has made in generators, which are important, backup generators, and link them together with hardware and controls software so that they're basically a system. And the way that it works, as Rich asked, is that when the grid goes down due to any kind of an outage, in Yarmouth, most likely it would be increasing weather impacts with climate change. When the grid goes down, the system can sense that the grid has gone down, and the system safely separates from the grid. So to use Fire Station 3 as an example, when the system goes down, the software for the energy controls for Station 3 would sense that the grid has gone down. Would have already set this up with Eversource in advance so that the control system goes into motion, separates the building safely so that no energy is being sent back out to the grid. Instead, all the energy is being used right there in the building. And then use the combination of solar, lithium-ion battery storage, which stores energy, and the backup generator to run a system that could continue to operate for up to 10 days. So we've done in the background a big data analysis of all the energy needs in the building, a financial analysis, and a technical plan so that we've optimized the size of these storage, solar, and existing backup generator systems into a cohesive system that can operate for up to 10 days during an outage.
And so I guess the key part that was interesting to me as we were talking this out, John, was that it does operate independently from the grid and does so safely, so that people that are cleaning up after the storm, picking up lines, reattaching lines aren't having any risk to themselves. And I guess, Austin, my question to you is those energy management systems, is that what you use to manage the program through the Cape Light Compact?
Sure, there are a couple of different participation pathways. At the end of the day, what we're really looking at in terms of the program performance measurement is what were those batteries putting out during the days and hours that we ask them to. So typically those are going to be weekdays between the hours of say 3 to 6 p.m. And actually we're seeing peaks shift later and later in the day for a couple of different reasons, not the least of which is increasing solar PV penetration across the region. That's pushing that peak later into the day. And especially we see this on Cape Cod, people coming in off the beach, they're cranking up the AC in their hotel room or their rental home or wherever they are and trying to get cooled off, and that's driving that later peak. And so, when we ask those batteries to dispatch, it's likely to be in those late afternoon, early evening hours. And at the end of the season, when we're looking at how these assets performed and determining how much we pay out to them, we look at the average output of those batteries across all of those events. Now, in terms of how they're dispatched, that can be done a couple of different ways. It could be done through a direct integration with our dispatch system. We use a cloud-based system to manage our entire dispatch portfolio on the C&I side. Or the town could choose to have a curtailment service, partner with a curtailment service provider and have them manage those assets in terms of the program, maybe other wholesale market opportunities that they could participate in exchange for a fee. But then, we work directly with some of those curtailment service providers and they can essentially assist with enrollment and participation in our program. So that is to say there's a couple different ways, but at the end of the day, what we're looking at is how much those batteries we're pumping out during those hours that we ask them to.
Great. Very good. Well, I'm going to kind of recap a couple of things here. Here's the concept that we're talking about. This grant is just a piece of that. Dan, do you just want to take a couple minutes? We've talked about most of this, being energy self-sufficient across critical infrastructure, about reducing emissions, providing operational cost savings, or perhaps even revenues to the town. But we haven't really talked about broadband or community access to the internet. And that is in our back of our minds as a potential outcome of part of this work, and how that might allow us to do additional services to residents, particularly those in need, whether it might be telemedicine or other public safety measures, or even lighting controls, for example.
Sure. So Rich had mentioned before, we had applied for 2 other facilities as part of the original MVP grant. That included Town Hall and the Yarmouth Police Department headquarters. And the concept originally as conceived would have given us like a 4 corners kind of box situation where we could connect those 4 key town-related assets to function in an emergency, but coupled with the idea that we also wanted to provide an opportunity through those assets to bring what I'd call a more robust broadband concept to not only the town as a government, but also potentially with its citizens. It would have really made a nice bookend for stringing a fiber network through those facilities. Now, that being said, we concurrently applied for and received another grant related specifically to broadband. And what we'll try to do with that effort is to continue to build out a network that with technology available today would allow, for lack of a better word, radio transmitters to be posted through different neighborhoods within the town and receivers on different receptive locations like houses or other town assets to receive a Wi-Fi signal. So with the Open Cape fiber network that exists in the town going up Route 28, we thought that was a great opportunity to bring these concepts that have really evolved within the last 5 years or so to make what we've envisioned here a real potential to bring to life something that the town of Yarmouth and its citizens could benefit for many, many years to come. So we will follow up the MVP work that's done with the municipal fiber project to bring and link these facilities together, again, through a combination potentially of radio receivers, microwaves, and also the light controllers that are on all our streetlights on Cape Cod. We can also experience control technology there that we could reduce the energy used by the streetlights and receive, for lack of a better phrase, credits back on that would allow us to continue to build out the network. So this is really what I'd call the Kickstarter for a multi-layered, really 21st century idea that has been conceived here in Yarmouth, and I'm really excited to bring all these partners back together again to start talking about the broadband aspect of it.
And that's that's great points, Dan. That's kind of what I wanted to elicit out of the discussion here was we got some very specific asks related to this grant that we're going to cover in just a second. But the context of this is a much broader and community-wide viewpoint that we have on how we want to address a lot of problems going forward. And this is the real small part of that. And I would point out, just the only other add to that is the street controls and the nodes that might enable the last mile, so to speak, for connectivity to the home on fiber is also a CLC related program. So a lot to work together with Cape Light Compact. So Chief Simonian, you have some experience with solar already over at Station 3. And maybe you can talk about that, but one of our pilot sites for the grant that John was spearheading was the 2 sites, the Workshop Road and the Station 3. And over at Station 3, the concept here is a solar canopy behind in the parking lot with the battery backup. So about
Hey, sweetie, let's see our solar canopy. I'm on mute.
Hi, Joyce.
Hi. Oh, sorry. I guess I'm not.
I like it. I like it. The next generation is learning about solar. It's great, Rich.
Yeah. So, Joyce, I'll let you chime in a second here. Joyce Flynn is the chairperson of our energy committee in town. So, recently at our town meeting, in order to enable solar canopies, we actually, by law, we're only allowed to execute contracts of up to 3 years unless you have a specific approval by town meeting. So one of the things that we got at our last town meeting and was approved, I wasn't there, but I'm pretty sure it was approved, was several sites. I think it was the DPW, police, and this fire station, and perhaps one other site that enabled up to a 30-year agreement for these types of projects. So without that town meeting a vote, we wouldn't be able to do something like this. It just wouldn't be cost effective for a developer to come in and do this for us. But the proposal was a 264 kilowatt solar PV system with a battery backup. It has an existing generator. And as John talked about, the energy management system that controls all that. And we'd like to work with Cape Light Compact on its Connected Solutions program, as Austin described, on the peak demand issues. And then the other aspect of this, and perhaps Jeff, you could comment, or maybe John could kick it off, but there was also we're anticipating that the installation of this canopy has some other benefits as far as stormwater runoff. And is that just the use of permeable materials and soil management? Is that kind of what the idea was on that?
Yeah, and Joe McGinn, who's on this call, is expert in this area from Weston and Sampson. But the idea, one of the value propositions and imperatives of the MVP program as a whole is to enable communities to use natural systems to mitigate and respond to climate change. And one of the things that we want to do here as part of the merits of this solution is to reduce the amount of stormwater that would flow into waterways and to safeguard water quality. So the idea, and I'm going to do a handoff here to Joe, is we want to reduce impervious surfaces and water just kind of running off, and instead treat it more naturally with permeable soils.
Thank you, John. I think one of the important aspects of solar projects in Massachusetts is in relation to stormwater, is that in DEP's Stormwater Management Manual and in their regulatory structure, they've already determined that runoff from solar facilities is deemed to be clean, that there is no pollutant transport associated with water running off of solar collectors. So right off the bat, you're in a substantially improved situation where you're in effect intercepting water that would otherwise hit the parking lot surface and then be presumed to be carrying parking area, automotive industry types of pollutants to the stormwater facilities, the runoff capture and transport and ultimately treatment and release portions of a stormwater system. So you're already a step ahead of the game in that you're presumed to be starting with essentially clean runoff to begin with. To then be able to incorporate that into green infrastructure styled stormwater facilities that include considerations like infiltration before it ever gets to a surface water body or a bioswale that allows native vegetation to be able to remove certain solids and other contaminants before they have an opportunity to enter a natural water system are all elements that we're working to incorporate into both the facilities for both sites. And in the plan sets that we'll be providing, you'll already see how some of that is being incorporated into infiltration and bio swale types of approaches on both locations. Interestingly enough, at the septage facility, there's a substantial amount of stormwater detention already in situ at that location. And in fact, it's interesting that the design plans for the solar collectors and the arrays actually contemplate being able to be constructed in or over portions of some of those retention facilities without impairing or impacting the retention basin's capacity to handle the stormwater that it was designed for at all in the first place. So it's multiple win-win in terms of being able to incorporate green infrastructure stormwater management principles and obtain all of the energy benefits that the solar projects will yield for the community in Yarmouth.
Joe, it's really exciting because, I mean, water quality is critically important on the Cape from a fisheries perspective, from a natural resource perspective, and to be able to safeguard that is really a pretty compelling benefit of these projects.
Yeah, and when we talk about, it's funny how you get started down one path on a relatively small grant. You're just looking at solar PV at 2 sites. And as you can see by our discussion here, we've expanded into all kinds of community initiatives, wastewater just being another significant issue that the town of Yarmouth has to face. And also just at our recent town meeting passed about $5.25 million to continue that effort. So it's all interrelated, and it's interesting how that tends to come together. But I do want to throw this back to Chief Simonian. Chief, how's that solar canopy fit into your operation over at Station 3, and what's your experience? Because you do have some existing solar over there right now on the roofs, right?
Yeah, we currently have the solar, a large array on the roof at Station 3. And also at the main station in South Yarmouth at 96 Old Main Street has a solar array also. Both have been working very effectively. I'm not sure the exact cost of savings for the town, but I know it's somewhere in the vicinity of 20 to 30,000 a year is what I was told was the anticipated savings from running those 2 solar projects. So the fact that we're adding a canopy for, to park equipment under, as well as the employee parking, and then the battery storage, I think will be really beneficial going forward.
And not part of this grant, but something that came up as we were going through this process, and I'll throw it over to Jeff. As he mentioned earlier, right across the street is the new DPW facility. And one of the things we identified early on was the facility was designed to carry solar panels on the roof, but that wasn't part of the bid to construct the facility. But we did, through a change order process, obtain additional funds out of the construction contingency to provide for that design to include those solar panels, with the idea that we would run an interconnection under the street to connect the DPW with the Station 3. And John, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's part of our upcoming or our pending application currently, correct?
That's exactly right, Rich, is to connect in this next application that we just submitted on the about 2 weeks ago for the next round 2 of Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Action Grant funding would be to connect, as you mentioned at the top of the call, Rich, the new Department of Public Works facility with Fire Station 3 right across the street. Jeff, I think actually you were the one who mentioned this, so that we would have essentially a redundant microgrid of those 2 facilities connected together, which would both be able to accomplish the points I mentioned a few minutes ago in terms of safely separating from the grid and be able to continuously operate for multiple days during a utility grid failure, be it storm driven or operationally driven.
So Jeff, I'll throw it over to you, and if you just want to maybe give a quick update as to what's happening with that DPW facility and the solar on that site, and then if you wouldn't mind, you could just kind of, and I'll follow up with you as well, address the transfer station site
Yeah, certainly. Over at the DPW site, as I mentioned before, that's a active construction project, and the town administrator mentioned this too, that the timing of these two projects seem to work out pretty well. Our DPW building committee, and I know the energy committee as well, was very excited about the opportunities for solar at the DPW site. So the roof was designed to support panels, but was not part of the cost of the project. So this opportunity is very exciting that we can incorporate that into the new DPW building, hopefully with at a good time frame in that project. There's also a large emergency generator at the being installed at the DPW site as well. And just to give a brief update as to where the status of that project is, the foundation is essentially done over at the DPW site, and steel delivery is scheduled actually tonight with a building to be constructed shortly thereafter. So within the next week or so, people driving down Buck Island Road should see a new building starting to arise out of the ground at that site. So that's exciting that this timing seems to be working out well for the planning of solar and this microgrid at this location. And then Rich, as you said, just transitioning over to what you're sharing on the screen here is the septage and transfer station facility. This is a good overview of that site. The building to the north, closest to the highway, is the septage treatment facility building. Just to the south and right of that is a compost building, which could have some components associated with the new anaerobic digester in that facility, or as part of that facility. And then the transfer station building is right adjacent to the train tracks, almost in the middle of your screen. That's a rail loading facility. So the trucks will come in, the trash trucks will come in, and there's a tipping floor, and then it gets loaded onto the rail cars, and those go out on the rail line. So there's some real exciting opportunities here. It's worth noting that the fourth large structure on that site just north of the tracks is the 10 million gallon storage tank associated with the treated effluent. And there is, as you can see from this picture, which is a great picture, a pretty significant solar array on the top of that tank. So there is already solar on this site, and it's exciting that we're talking about adding that as a component of this project and a separate project that's being worked for this particular site here at 50 Workshop Road.
Yeah, I'll just comment on that real quick. We had broken this parcel up. Ed Centeo, the town's finance director, has been working on for years the Cape Cod Energy Park concept. And as I understand it, the town's continuing to work on a potential RFP that might be coming out in the future for other parcels of this property. But one use that we identified was what we called Parcel E, which is this area right here between Route 6 and the septage facility. And we finally got through the site requirements and are able to proceed with getting building permits for, I think it ended up being about 500, half a megawatt of solar, ground mount solar over on this site here. And then John, what's proposed under this MVP application, which was 75% design, was ground mount over in this area over here to the west of the site, correct?
That's right. On the right there where you just circled with the cursor on the west, and also I believe it's south on the other side of the railroad tracks, where in the area that's disturbed there to the left, we would have an additional solar array so that we get to about 1.2 megawatts of total solar in an effort to support the multi-day resiliency and to save as much money as possible on the town's operating costs.
So at this point, I'm going to jump ahead on the slides here. And then Joyce Flynn and Sue Starkey and Sandra Cashin and Mike Duffy are all part of the Yarmouth Energy Committee. And Joyce, do you have any comments? How does all this fit into what some of the work and planning that the Energy Committee has been doing?
Well, Energy Committee is obsessed with the resiliency of the planet. So we work on energy and resiliency here within town and try to help make a translation from the big plans that you all are doing to the level of individual residents so that they'll be able to understand and vote for these good things. I'd like to introduce our newest member, Mike Duffy. He's someone who's worked for years with the National Renewable Energy Lab and holds a doctorate in industrial and systems engineering. He's done energy efficiency, he's done safeguards and security, he's done renewables. He's working for Energy Committee for free. We can't believe our luck. But Mike, if you want to talk about some of the plans that you've principally designed and been working on Energy Committee moving forward with, I think they dovetail nicely with the kind of things that Rich is talking about pulling together. Mike, I think you might be on mute. While Mike is unmuting, let me just say that was a lovely solar canopy.
I'm glad you appreciate it. Hi, Mike, we got you.
Okay, I'm unmuted and I'm videoed. So Joyce, thanks for the introduction, but I would say be careful. You say I'm working for free, you might get what you're paid for here. If I am the newest member of, I've still been on the Energy Committee, I don't know what it is, 4 or 5 years now. But although the Energy Committee's role is advisory, we do have the ability to both educate and motivate municipal employees, small business owners, and the general public with respect to energy improvements. As a result, we've adopted a mission that basically says to inspire energy sustainability throughout the town of Yarmouth, municipal buildings, schools, commercial businesses, residential homes, and transportation vehicles. In particular, we believe the town should be able to strive to achieve by 2025 a 20% reduction in energy consumption, a 20% increase in the use of renewable energy, and 1,000 zero-emission vehicles. Our activities, that is, those activities of the Energy Committee, are guided by 3 core principles. First, reduced environmental impact. Second, consumer choice. And third, affordability. For fiscal year 2021, we prepared an operating plan that focuses on the kind of tasks that can be undertaken by the Energy Committee in motivating and educating the Yarmouth community in energy savings available through conservation, efficiency, renewable generation, and electric vehicle acceptance. We're going to be using a 3-phase approach. First, assemble the energy use data. Second, develop outreach materials. And third, educate and motivate the community. Our operating plan is consistent with the aspirations put forth in the Energy Committee's 5-year vision, and also the Board of Selectmen support sustainability goal. Our FY 2021 plan should be available on the Energy Committee's website soon. Finally, I want to mention that the Energy Committee has taken the lead in acquiring a grant from the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center to participate in the 2020 Solarized Massachusetts Plus program. Our scope will be to develop and implement a community outreach, education, and group purchasing program designed to reduce the cost and increase the adoption of residential and small-scale commercial solar PV systems and air source heat pumps. Because of the pandemic, we've had to extend the duration of this program from being potentially completed in 2020 to now extending it into mid-2021. So that in a nutshell is what we're doing from a planning standpoint within the Energy Committee. If there's any questions, I might be able to answer them.
Oh, Mike, you know what I would love to add? This is Joyce again. There are 2 town staff members here that we'd like to thank for bringing the whole Solarized Plus grant application to our attention. One is Rich himself, who wrote a killer marketing plan. I mean, you should see this. I mean, it's amazing. And then also Tara Monroe, who applied her understanding of state procedures and governmental language to often fill us in on where we were missing nuance. So they both have put a lot of time into that. And we actually would have loved to corral Rich to stay until we were done the grant. But when I look at that beautiful window behind you, Rich, I see what could we do to compete with that office? Congratulations and thank you.
It beats the basement, I'll tell you that. But Mike, I think what you outlined there is great work by the Energy Committee, and it really highlights the important role that the Energy Committee plays on getting some of these practices and projects through town meeting and information to the public about what we're doing and the importance of it. And the thing that occurs to me and John and Dan and Joe or Jeff or Austin or any of you that want to comment, people used to think of these things as one-off projects, and it really isn't that way. This isn't a one-off project. This is part and parcel of an overall approach to how you're going to do business in the future and maintaining sustainability and environmentally friendly practices. And John, you might have a little more experience than I do on that type of thing, but it just seems it's the way of the future. It's not we're going to do this grant and then we're done. This has to keep going on in the future, and that's kind of what the Energy Committee is mentioning here.
And I think the call that we're on right now illustrates the importance of you take the operational skills and background of Jeff Colby and Chief Simonian, financial skills, Rich, that you have, and then management skills from Dan, and you need all those skill sets to really move the ball forward. You need partners like the Cape Light Compact to really make sure that we're maximizing the revenues from the project and the savings from the project, because these projects are great for the environment, and we have a lot of metrics around it in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and helping the Energy Committee meet their goals of, over 20% clean energy. But we also need to save the town money on a monthly and annual basis. I mean, the business plan has to be there, and we need all these skill sets to kind of come together and focus, as you said, Rich, to make that happen.
And that's the bottom line for me. If anything, and maybe Dan will probably agree or maybe not, but if anything, I've always been practical. What can we actually do? And does it really make sense? And all these things just make perfect sense. And so it makes it easy to move things forward when it makes sense. That being said,
Rich, if I might just on that note, because I think this project is an important public policy concept. It really does speak to the idea that within this town of Yarmouth, we have this opportunity here to really be on what I call the cutting edge of all the different aspirations that a lot of communities have. And the Commonwealth has been a great partner in everything that we've done here. We've kept them in the loop on the anaerobic digester piece. We've kept them, obviously, as part of the MVP. We were able to get that initial grant that brings us here to today. We're hopeful for the next round, and I think they very much like this project. And also the technology grant that we received for the community compact that allows us to go into what I call like phase 2 of this with, I think, the next big utility of the 21st century, which is information technology and broadband, so that, what I'd call reliable, cost-effective internet capability is in reach of all of our citizens. And from a public policy perspective, I've always been bullish on the concept that this all works when we can demonstrate that you can make these improvements and at the same time save the taxpayers real dollar values and meet the objective of reducing the overall carbon footprint of the town. And I think right here in the Mid-Cape, in this small patch of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we really hit a grand slam with this concept. The team we put together is second to none. This has been, to Rich, your point, this has been a conversation point in town for a long time. Energy Committee's been at the table for a long time. And in the last couple of years, the momentum started to move on this opportunity, and like a stone picking up momentum rolling down the hill. We're at a point now where I think the next couple of years will be absolutely fantastic in achieving what we all wanted to see get done here in town. So I want to thank everybody for being part of that, and all of our partners along the way. And certainly the folks on the Energy Committee who have been at this table for a very long time. We're at a point that's really exciting in the town's history right now.
And just an aside, before we move on and conclude here, but this Solarize program has a lot of importance to the community, not because of the benefit it provides to any individual homeowner that can take advantage of some energy savings by putting solar on their roof, but the information communication vehicle that's going to provide the education to our residents about all these things that we're doing is just super important. You might not engage people otherwise, but by going through the Solarize program and the outreach that's planned for that effort through the Energy Committee is going to provide a lot of great education to our residents and it really highlight how the initiatives we're taking here saves the town money and ultimately saves them money. So with that being said, John, if you don't mind, what you've produced is 75% designed through this planning grant that we had. But that is basically rolling forward into another request to the state. So we can basically finalize the design for the Fire Station 3 and the Workshop Road site solar projects and battery projects. And then that leads into actually doing an RFP to get an installer to complete that work. Can you describe that process a little bit?
Yes, Rich. So when Weston Sampson and our team completes, knock on wood, Yarmouth receives this next grant, which we've applied for a couple weeks ago, to complete the planning and take planning from 75% to 100%. That work will be completed by June of 2021. And the objective is to then, for the town of Yarmouth to have a request for proposals and a public procurement to select a provider which will come in and make the capital investment in the project and provide Yarmouth with an energy services contract that will save Yarmouth money and that will enable Yarmouth to move the project forward without a capital expenditure on its part. So that is where we're going with this. And all the work that our team and everyone on the phone is doing will enable the provider that's selected to adopt all the energy planning and have a very efficient project and a very quick project to implement. So that's where this is going. Rich mentioned to me the other day that there may be an option to even optimize the financial plan further for the town of Yarmouth in terms of, taking a look at even some opportunities for ownership over time for Yarmouth of the project. And that's certainly something that could be added into the mix, but it's all this advanced work that we're doing is going to really pay off in terms of the quality of the project that's done. In terms of resiliency to storm-driven outages, greenhouse gas reduction, and economic savings, operating cost savings for the town.
So John, thank you for all your efforts. I open up the floor. We've been talking for almost an hour here. If there's anybody that has any particular comments or questions, I would love to hear them. And maybe we'll have to take them aside and follow up, but it's a good time to get things out on the table and to follow up on any questions. Joyce, from the Energy Committee's perspective?
Confess that I'm very interested in when the whole fiber optic cable may be done. I know for years that kind of languished. Do we have any sort of timetable on that?
Go ahead, Dan.
So Joyce, what we wanted to do is get this project underway at a point in time where we can actually have what I'd call a more prescriptive infrastructure outlay for a consultant to look at. So in the coming weeks, we're going to engage a request for proposal for assistance as it relates to that topic and what it is that we can do with this first round of money that we receive. So that effort with broadband will go concurrently with this development of this project now that we're at this point.
Thank you.
And Tara, thank you for participating. I know you've been
following up.
Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, I was just going to say, following up to that, I know this was primarily addressing the energy infrastructure, but two hazards that come to mind that weren't on your list are, of course, the pandemic and the nuclear power plant basically shut down in Pilgrim. And I'm wondering if either one of those need to be addressed.
Call from Kevin.
Well, I think the pandemic in particular, since we're in the middle of that right now, goes particularly hand in hand with, as Dan's comments regarding the fiber infrastructure and how these projects really are related as far as sustainability and resiliency. It's, you know, we had the tornado as a low risk on our list of things, of hazards, and we didn't even have a pandemic, and those are the first two things that have happened since. So I guess we gave it a good shot, but it all goes hand in hand. And as far as the nuclear plant, Dan, I don't really have anything on that, but the ability to work remotely, it's not just the fiber, but I see, and Dan, I don't know if you see the same perspective, but it's down here in my new role down in Eastham, the ability to work remotely and policies and practices associated with that and how that's going to actually happen and enabling people to do that. I think that's going to become a big topic in the municipal world in the years going forward.
I think the pandemic is having a national conversation on what work in the future looks like. And in fact, the opportunity to be interconnected with a high-speed internet utility will just benefit the Cape. You know, the Cape is a very delicate infrastructure, and the concept that we could actually have a pretty robust economy right here out of our own homes because of that 21st century technology investment is just speaks volumes of the potential of this area. You take the wonderful living conditions that we have here, coupled with the ability to transact work in a 21st century fashion that the pandemic has demonstrated, which I think is the path forward. Even in here in Town Hall, within days, we transitioned to a completely at-home presence, and having that utility available to all the taxpayers in town, all the residents available to them will just definitely accelerate that concept. And I think part of the national discussion about that is there's a certain amount of the population that doesn't have access to that utility. By the town taking a lead step here, we can ensure access for all of our citizens and certainly be a potential conversation for a regional hub. So on the pandemic side, I think that's caused planners to rethink what economic activities look like. As far as the atomic plant goes, I think over having some experience in dismantling plants in the past, we'll likely have to live with dry cask fuel rods there in Plymouth for a number of years until the federal government, gets a plan together to deal with that. And then certainly Millstone and Seabrook are the other plants still active on the eastern seaboard, northeastern United States. So I think critically when people take either an atomic plant or an old fossil plant offline, you have to think about what replaces to some degree those megawatts. And what was interesting, Austin brought up, was how the peak is shifting due to a lot of different reasons. And I know when I was working with the state, we studied the peak impact pretty significantly. And it was impressive to me at certain points in the day, typically when people go to work, and it used to be like 3 to 5 or 3 to 6 in the afternoon, you could see the impact of fossil fuel plants as these peak generators are coming online to meet that. So one of the big goals the state had back then was to incentivize communities to install LED street lamps, because the lamps and the hundreds of thousands of units across the Commonwealth were enormous power consumers. And by and large, the Department of Energy Resources has been able to turn hundreds of thousands of lamps into LEDs. And so now what we're trying to deal with the solar capacity and the other renewables coming online, a more manageable system to get that peak under control so we don't have to kick on fossil plants and kind of be in charge of our own destiny as it relates to clean energy.
The only other thing I'd just add is it's anecdotal at this point, but it's very interesting to me over the last couple of months. I lived on the, the lower to outer Cape end of the world. On this end of the world, and I didn't notice it as much in Yarmouth, but certainly here in Eastham and Orleans down towards Provincetown, it wasn't summer crowds, but it was certainly busy. And Jeff, I don't know if you noticed it down in Chatham. There were a lot of people around that you normally wouldn't find around because they weren't going into their offices. So they came to their homes here on the Cape and worked remotely from home. And that's the Silicon Sandbar dream from 20 years ago that people always had in mind, that, the Cape economy could be something like that. And it is something that's of interest to me, and I do want to pursue ultimately what's been happening the last several months, so that as we move forward into the future, is that something we can take advantage of? Because it's definitely has happened. There's a lot of people around. Tara Monroe, you've been a faithful participant with the Energy Committee and been a very active participant. So I just wanted to give you the opportunity if you have anything to add or any questions that you wanted to mention. Okay.
She's muted.
Well, you can unmute yourself, and she always knows where to reach us. So, does anybody else have any questions or comments? Okay, well, with that, I thank you all for participating. The meeting was recorded, and I'll work with Kyle Pedicini to get this posted online. And I thank you for participating, and thanks for all your efforts and everybody that had a role to play in all of this. So thanks again.
Rich, and a big thank you to you for the role that you played in getting us to this point and being our host. You did a fabulous job, so thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
Indeed. Thank you, Rich.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Dan.
You're welcome.
Take care, everybody.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Rich.
Thanks,
Good luck.
everyone.